Hi guys, it's Rav Shalom. It's good to be with you right now, even though we're not physically together, but we're spiritually together. I hope you guys have all been managing in your isolation, your respective locations. I really miss all of you. I miss being together with you and learning together in class. But I'm sure you guys are being strong, and our learning together should be, in the zchut of our learning, there should be a refuah shlema to everybody who's sick and who's having a hard time. So here's what we're going to do. This is going to be a two-part series entitled Lashana Haba B'Yerushalayim, Pesach in the Beit HaMikdash. Right now, the first installment of the series is going to be the mitzvah of Aliyah L'Regel, pilgrims who would travel from close and from near and far and wide to Yerushalayim for Pesach, and what that involved getting there, and the project of traveling and also hosting for the people who were in Yerushalayim. And then next time we're going to talk about Pesach proper, the mitzvah of bringing the Korban Pesach, Erev Pesach, and Yom Tov in the Beit HaMikdash itself, and some of the unique and very inspiring spiritual aspects of that experience. So here we go. The sources that we're going to learn from right now are mainly the Mishnah in Masechet Pesachim and also Masechet Shkalim, which talks about a lot of things that would happen in the Beit HaMikdash and during that time. Also, some historical sources, Josephus and others who lived in the time of the Beit HaMikdash, mainly the second Beit HaMikdash in the time of the Romans, but also before. The book that I'm using right now is called Haggadat HaMikdash. It's published in English as the Temple Haggadah. It's put out by Rav Yisrael Ariel, who is the head of the Temple Institute of Machon HaMikdash in Yiltzidi in Yerushalayim. Definitely recommended. So, what was the mitzvah of Aliyah L'Regel? What did it involve? What did you have to do? So, as we know, the mitzvah of bringing the Korban Pesach was required of all Jews, and that also included the mitzvah of coming to the Beit HaMikdash 3 times a year for Yom Tov and whenever possible. And the most popular and the main time that they would come, that people would come, was Pesach. So what the book talks about, and what we know from the Mishnah, is that people packed for a long journey. People came from places within Israel where they could travel within a day or two, but also from much farther away, from countries like Egypt, Syria, Bavel, which today is Iraq, Greece, and other countries. And sometimes that trip could take weeks, even over a month. And that involved packing for a major journey, right? They would have to take food for a major portion of the trip. They'd be taking their animals, their gifts for the Beit HaMikdash and the Kohanim. They had the half shekel donation to the Beit HaMikdash that everybody needed to bring. They had their Maaser Sheni, which was special Maaser money that they were supposed to eat only in Yerushalayim, which they would eat on Pesach itself usually, or they would bring money to buy the food to eat as Maaser Sheni in Yerushalayim. And it involved packing things for your kids and everything that you would need to have a month-long trip traveling to Yerushalayim, with everything that involved. So take a minute as you're listening to this and think, what would it be like if I was taking that trip? From America, it wouldn't have really been possible back then, but imagine, without WhatsApp, without communication, without airplanes, going on a trek, a long journey like that, leaving weeks before, maybe even right after Purim, in order to get to Yerushalayim in time for Pesach. What would you bring? How would you plan it? What would you be thinking about with your friends and with your family? And we know from Josephus and other writers that it was not a simple process, right? We know traveling back then was very dangerous. There were wild animals. Sometimes there were robbers. They knew that people would be carrying money with them for the half shekel or maser sheni. And, the text we have of Tfilat HaDerech, the prayer for traveling, comes from that time, is that there were a lot of dangers. And it was not a simple thing to make a trip to Yerushalayim over the course of a few weeks, and it may have been a major sacrifice. So what I would say here is that we have to think about the goal, right? It could be a very daunting task, very scary to take a trip like that, especially with young kids. And we have to keep in mind what the goal was, and their goal was twofold. Number one, obviously, was the great mitzvah of bringing the Korban Pesach, which everybody had to bring their own Korban Pesach, and it was a great mitzvah, which unfortunately we cannot yet do today. And the second goal was to be together with the entire Jewish people, as many people could make it, in sharing and experiencing Pesach together as one united group of Jews in the Beit HaMikdash, which we've also talked about in class. That Yerushalayim and the Mikdash was a place for us, not for Hashem, but a place for us, and it was our window that we had into connecting with God and connecting spiritually with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And those goals remained paramount, and that was what motivated people to take this trip and to sacrifice so much to have the strength to be able to do it, and hopefully that should inspire us. Now, what about preparations? How about the people living in Israel and all the people who worked for the Beit HaMikdash and the leaders of the Jewish people at that time? How did they prepare for all these tourists, right? We know today, you look around and you see tourism, even today, Baruch Hashem, on holidays. This year won't be so very much. But you guys know what it looks like when they prepare and they plan all these activities and open up places for tourists and people coming to visit, to experience the holidays in Israel. And we know what they did. The Mishnah talks about that too. There was a massive operation of preparing, which we know from the Mishnah in Shkalim. It's the very first Mishnah in Masechet Shkalim. And it talks about already starting from Shushan Purim, on the 15th day of Adar. Right after Purim, they would already begin the process of preparing to host and take in visitors coming for Aliyah L'Regel. And the Mishnah mentions 4 things that they would do. Number 1, they would start fixing the roads. Now, they didn't have paved roads for cars like we do today, but they had dirt roads, and they were probably very dirty or muddy from all the rains. They may have had rocks strewn all over it. They hadn't been used much in the winter, so they had to fix the roads. Number 2, they fixed the streets inside the cities for people to have rest stops and to buy food and to rest the night at the local hotel on the cities on the way to Yerushalayim and in Yerushalayim itself. That's 2. Number 3, they would dig wells and fix the mikvahs. Right, the wells are to draw drinking water on the way if it was hot and they needed water, and also mikvahs, right? That we know that you had to be pure to be tahor, to be on site of the Beit HaMikdash, and there were a lot of mikvahs that they made sure were kosher and filled with water along the way for people to dip in. For example, some of you guys might remember. They're right outside Alon Shvut, on Derech HaAvot, on that path that goes behind Alon Shvut to Neve Daniel, the path of the patriarchs. There is a Second Temple era mikvah from 2,000 years ago, which was most probably used during that time by people coming to visit the Beit HaMikdash. And we know there was a person who worked for the Mikdash who his job was to oversee, to supervise the digging of these wells and fixing the mikvahs. His name was Nechunya Chofer Shichin. Nechunya in charge of the digging of the wells. And here's a picture in the Temple Agada. You can see there's a guy overseeing, giving them instructions, and they're working on building the well for the people walking on the way. And the fourth thing the Mishnah mentions is they would mark off graves in cemeteries or in open fields where they wouldn't expect there to be a grave. They would put a strip of white paint on it, because if you needed to stay pure and you're dipping in the mikvah, right, what would happen if you walked too close to a cemetery or to a grave? You'd become tameh, you'd become impure. So they had to mark those off so people walking, if anything near the road, near the main road, would be seen. So that's just some of the examples of the project, the great project of fixing up and building and preparing to host people. We also know that this process of visitors coming and making Aliyah L'Regel and the thousands and the preparations to greet them was so important that if large groups were running late, or there was a lot of rain very late in the season, it was still muddy, or the preparations weren't ready yet. So that was a reason that at the time that the Sanhedrin, the rabbinic leaders, were allowed to add an extra leap month. Like we know even today, we have the first month of Adar and the second month of Adar in a leap year. And today it's automatic as part of the calendar every few years. But back then, if the preparations were running late or too many people were going to get stuck on the way, they wouldn't get there in time, they were allowed to add a leap month. Even another reason that could happen was they used to build special ovens that they would use to roast the Korban Pesach, because it had to be roasted a special way, according to the mitzvot in the Torah, and also kosher Pesach, obviously. And they used to prepare these ovens months in advance, and they would work on cementing it and using the ingredients, the materials that they had already during the winter, so that they would be ready in time for Pesach. And if those ovens were not ready, or they didn't have enough of them for the thousands of visitors, or they would melt because of the rain, then they'd have to wait. They'd push it off by a month. And we know all these preparations it was a massive job and required a lot of people. And it was a great sacrifice on the part of both sides, the hosts and the guests. Which reminds us of the power that Aliyah L'Regel and coming to visit Hashem's Shekhinah and be together with all Bnei Israel involved. So we have about a minute left. I'm just going to read to you a description from Philo of Alexandria, a famous Jewish philosopher who lived in Egypt at the time of the Second Temple. And he writes that tens of thousands of people from many, many cities would stream into the Beit HaMikdash for the holiday, from the east and from the west, from the north and from the south, and that they would make major preparations so that the people would be able to come on time, and to create an atmosphere of brotherhood and happiness. And it would allow people to share the experience all together with simcha, and that was the goal. And the Mishnah in Masechet Bikurim, which also talks about coming on Aliyah L'Regel to visit the Mikdash, says something similar, that they would already have rest stops, pit stops on the way, such as one of the main stops was the city of Modi'in, which some of you know, maybe you've even been there. And it describes how people would gather together maybe a week or a little while before in Modi'in, which was just a few kilometers away, a day's walk. And they would sleep. They would all stay overnight in the city. and they would wake up early the next morning to get ready to march together with their animals and their families to Yerushalayim. And the Mishnah says that they would get up in the morning and they would have special leaders of the groups who would stand up and announce, Kumu v'na'alu Tzion el Beit Hashem Elokeinu. Everyone, rise up, get up, and let's go up on our way this morning to head the last leg of the journey to the house of Hashem. And I think what we can learn from this whole process, which is a little different today, but we still have echoes of it, is that the sacrifice and the massive amounts of preparation, the project that it took for them to take this trip, and for the people of Yerushalayim to host all of them and to take care of their needs and their food and everything else, should inspire us, and we should think about what sacrifices we've made for Torah and to be close to Hashem, and to have achdut and to be together with Bnei Yisrael, with the other Jews, even at this time when we're physically separated, but we're doing our best to remain spiritually united and get as close to Hashem as we can, even though we're far away. Our hearts and our minds are making this trek, as difficult as it may be, wherever we are this Pesach, to connect through the window of Yerushalayim, and to think about this when we daven and face Yerushalayim, that we're still remaining as one united people, yearning to be close to Hashem, and to be continued in part 2 of this 2-part set, Pesach in the Beit HaMikdash. I wish you all an amazing, amazing day. Hang in there. Bye-bye.